very warm hello to everyone who's joining in the 10th episode of Step Up with Natasha. I have been, in particular, very kicked about this episode for two reasons. A, because we are completing 10th episode, and B, today we are not going to talk about anything which is earthly. There's no consciousness, there is no psychedelics, there's no love and relationships. We are talking Mars today, and for that, I have astrobiologist Dr. Armando Azua Bustos joining me tonight for this conversation. And he looks out for existence of Martian life by staying on Earth. Hello, Dr. Armando. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Step Up with Natasha.
Hello, and thank you for your invitation.
To be very honest, I've been really looking forward to this conversation ever since you said yes. Because this is not something that you will make sense of it. Like, this is science. You need to do your proper research. You need to get your facts right. You just can't assume things about it, right? So as more and more I was digging up more and about it, it is so cool what you do. I mean, this has never happened in Step Up with Natasha. You do a really cool job looking out for life on Mars.
Well, what I do is focus in the field of astrobiology. Astrobiology try to understand the origin of life on Earth and the possibility to find the life elsewhere in the universe. It is a scientific discipline, and it is still unknown or a little known in some part of the world, but it has been developed by NASA since the late 90s, something like that. That's what it started with the name of astrobiology. So there is a heavy investment on this in the US and in Europe, and that explains all the missions that are regularly sent elsewhere to the solar system and elsewhere in order to understand such questions.
Right. So if we may say so that Mars is sterile as of now, like it has no life as of now, right?
That we don't know. That's the whole question there. Is Mars inhabited or not? And the way we're trying to solve that is first find evidences of what life on Earth at least needs, and then go to those places that have those characteristics, like, for example, the presence of liquid water. And once you have found evidence of liquid water, as is in the case of Mars, then you go there with another type of instrument specifically designed to look for evidences of life. So we are now in that stage. We do know that Mars was a much wetter planet in the past, where you find even seas, and now we're looking for what remains of that in order to search for what we call biosignatures. That is a number of different molecules that could tell us that there was life, or even there may be still life around.
Okay. So, in fact, to all the viewers who would be watching this, and in fact, I want to confirm this with you as well. In one of your interviews, the interviewer asked the misconception that people have about the concept of life on Mars. And I believe we are not talking about like an intelligent living human form like us. This is not something that we're going to find on Mars, right? So what is life like on Mars? What is exactly we are exploring there?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because when we're looking for life, at least in the solar system, we expect to find the microbial life. I mean, life, the type of life you need a microscope to see, right? But that doesn't prevent that, for example, in icy moons of Saturn or Jupiter, like Europa or Enceladus, where we have pretty good evidence of internal seas that have even much water than Earth, you could find more advanced forms of life, but in the terms of something like, what similar to a fish, or maybe, or something like that, not intelligent life. So if we're looking for life, at least in the solar system, we expect to find the type of life that we on Earth call microbial life, microorganisms.
Right. Okay. So all the viewers, they need to know that Atacama Desert was declared as the analog model for Mars. That means that it has the perfect Martian-like environment and climate. So that whosoever scientists want to discover more about Mars, they go to Atacama, right? So, but tell me one thing. I mean, I really wanted to know, because Mars is cold and Atacama is hot.
Mm.
Doesn't that contradict when you're looking for life in Martian-like environment on
Yeah,
Earth? Doesn't that
yeah. Well,
contradict?
that is a very good question because that's why we talk about analog. An analog is something that looks like, but it's not exactly the same phenomenon. So in the case of the Atacama, why do we think that it is a good Mars analog model? Is because first it's really dry. There is places in the Atacama that are as dry or even drier than Mars. Second, you have on Earth the highest amount of UV radiation. You have it in the Atacama, which is make it similar to the case of Mars. Third, its soils are highly saline and with a number of different type of oxidizing species, which make it the soils pretty close to the Martian soils. So you're right. The Atacama is not a cold desert. It's not a hot desert either. It's a temperate desert. There's a misconception that all desert must be hot. It's not the case of Atacama and many other deserts as well. And so for that, for example, if you want to focus on temperatures, you will go into the dry valleys of Antarctica, where it's a really cold place, but it's not as dry as Atacama. So you lose the factor of, you win the factor of temperature in Antarctica, but you lose the factor of having too much water in there. So as I said, that is the proper definition of an analog, something that looks alike, but it's not necessarily the same thing of what you're trying to study. And you just need to deal with what you have. I mean, the perfect analog model would be both as dry and as cold as Mars, but we don't have that. You either have it very cold or
Or
very
very hot?
dry,
Right.
but not yet we have found a place that is as dry as Atacama and as cold as Mars, for example.
Okay. So even if we talk about analog models, how do we make sure that Atacama would be in terms of even the structure of it would be very much like Mars? And I'm not a student who's got like A's in geography, but I'm literally talking about in terms of these are two very different planets. I'm sure the crust and the core
Mm,
and the mantle, and
mm,
also because we know that Mars is less than 1% as dense as Earth is.
mm.
So I mean, do you think that it would be a really like it's a different level altogether?
Not really, because again, you need to study you need to focus on what you want to study. For example, in my case, I want to study how life, whether you could find life on Mars due that is so dry. So I focus on the part of the water availability. So in the case of the Atacama, I look for those places that are really dry in order to see how life has adapted to the lack of water. So this is focus by focus. It's not that of course, you say we have a huge atmosphere in Mars. They don't have it, but for the purpose of the microorganisms, which have a size of a 1 micrometer, that doesn't matter much as long as you find the proper habitat. For example, if you are looking, in my case, for microorganisms of the soil, 1 meter down, it doesn't change much where you have an atmosphere like Earth or an atmosphere like Mars.
Because it's under
Um,
the ground. Is
yeah,
that
because it's under the ground, for example. So again, there is so much people interested on this that you need again to focus on what you want to understand. If you want to, for example, understand the effect of the atmosphere, then you would go to the places on Earth. For example, you go up into the high Andes or up into the high Himalayas in order to see what kind of life you could find in the atmosphere there. But as far as we know, there is no atmosphere. There's no microbial life that live just in the atmosphere. They use it typically as a way of transport to move from one place to another. There's not like airborne bacteria that are always in the air, making this metabolism and growing and dividing just in the atmosphere. So that doesn't add much to the whole picture.
right?
And
So
so, for example, that's a good way to see it in the case of that particular question.
right. So okay, having established that, you have been successfully been able to actually discover that microbial life in that Martian-like environment. I mean,
Mm,
high salinity, I believe, high UV radiation, and
mm,
really low water levels. Right. So
Hmm.
how does that impact the Mars mission in terms of that? Are we looking for the similar sort of microbes there on Mars, or are we looking at transporting microbial life like that from here to Mars and see whether it can survive there or not?
Well, those are two separate and very different questions. One is
Right.
what you expect to find on Mars, which is, uh, uh, as I said, we expect to find microbial life, but what kind of life? We cannot tell that because the evolution of life, if ever life arose on Mars, may have been completely different, right? So we expect something similar to a microorganism, but what kind of life exactly, we don't know. In my case, I'm not trying to say what kind of life we will find on Mars, but where to find it. I can say, well, if you want to find life on Mars, look for the type of substrate that are on Earth, and know to better capture water from the atmosphere, for example, gypsum or salt, or go in deep into the ground, because there you will be protected from the harsh radiation environment of the Martian atmosphere, and there you may have access also in the underground to underground sources of water, for example. So I'm not saying what I can find, but where you should look for, based on similar environment on Earth. And as for the possibility of life transference between the planets, that's a very interesting question, very important question, because actually there is on NASA there is a planetary protection office that is worried specifically on that, not by sending our rovers and landers to Mars contaminated with Earth's life, in order to contaminate a place that we still don't know whether it's inhabited or not, or whether we could, if we bring contaminant, instead of trying to detect Martian life, we by mistake detected the contaminant that will go with us together. So there is a very critical issue there, that every mission that goes to Mars has to comply with a strict sterilization protocol in order to send it as clean as we can, and you have to show proof of that in order to send something really clean and not contaminate an environment. As I said, we don't know yet whether it's inhabited or not. And the second, you can see the second part of that question in the way forward. I mean, the way back. When this mission in the Perseverance will be taking samples of the Martian soil, and will be storing it for our next mission to bring it back to Earth. And so the question remains the same: how you protect those samples when they come back to Earth, so not to be contaminated by life forms on Earth, so you don't detect the wrong things, and also not contaminate Earth with potentially something that coming from Mars. And although we know that that's a very small possibility, so you just need to be careful anyway. And so the whole building will be built in order to receive those Martian samples, in order to be properly working with it. So not to there should be no contamination from Mars to Earth, or from Earth to Mars, or to any planetary body. Well, except maybe the Moon. Now we don't now we do know that there's no chance of having life on the Moon. Then you don't have to worry about that. But we didn't know that before. So, for example, when Apollo 11 went to the Moon, you may have read that the astronauts, when they came out back to Earth, they went into this quarantine process, something which we are all well aware now. So they had to stay in a confined environment, be inspected and be looked by doctors, in order to see whether any of them they develop potentially a moon bag, that could get us all sick. Again, we didn't think that there was actually a true possibility, but we didn't want to run any chances on that actually happening.
Right. So, because like you only mentioned that there has been signs of water that has been actually caught in findings on Mars, and what the kind of microbes that you have figured out or discovered, those are with very low water availability. So is it the same, or would this impact the whole research that you have been doing? And I mean, how it's going to shape up if you have been looking for low water availability microbes and there have been water signs on Mars? So how beautifully it's going to mix together and come up with a very useful information.
Well, in my case, I think if you ever find life on Mars, it will be again in very particularly protected environments where you have some water availability. So those type of microbial life, I think, will be similar to the ones I found in on Atacama. In the case that they should be very efficient on the capture, retention, and the use of the little water available. So, and as I said, the one place that I think that could be happening is in the underground.
Right. Okay. And what is the next step? I mean, if we are able to find microbes, microbial life there, genius. If we take some from here and they're able to survive there, amazing. But what does that signify for human race? Like, does that make it habitable for us? Because that's what the whole quest has been like. Does that, even if we figure out life, what is the next step for us?
Yeah. First, let me talk about something that bringing life from here to Mars. That's not in the near future by far, because again, we don't know whether Mars is or was an inhabited planet. So we don't want to contaminate it with our own life forms. So there's, I mean, no one will approve you bringing any kind of life forms to Mars. But that will take place anyway when we send astronauts to Mars, because there will be no way to protect Mars from all remains of a human habitat there, because as far as I know, you cannot completely sterilize a human being. So that's something that we will need to confront. But let's go to the first part of the question. If we do find evidences of life on Mars, the next question that will follow is how similar or how different is from life on Earth. Um, First, you have to consider there is a lot of transference of material between Mars and Earth. It has been estimated that every year about 30 tons of Mars arrive to Earth. Most of that material is small particles that burn into the atmosphere, but a few come into the ground as meteorite, and we do know at least 24 Martian meteorites that have make it to Earth. We are certain of that because of the number of characteristics of those meteorites. So that could lead us to think that there are also maybe a transfer of material from Earth to Mars, right? So if let's imagine a hypothetical scenario where at the stage that life was arising on Earth, Mars was a much wetter and habitable environment than is now. So there is a chance, a hypothetical chance, that maybe life arose on Mars and then contaminated Earth and then inoculated Earth, and then that was a complete different path of evolution. So we may be looking for Martians all of this time, and we just need to look ourselves into the mirror to find it, right? And the other chance is that life was transferred from Earth to Mars and then continue a different path of evolution there. And the way you would know both alternatives is that if both life forms are really different, I mean, really similar, you would say, well, at some point, there must be some kind of transfer of material. Whether Mars contaminated Earth or Earth contaminated Mars, that we wouldn't know. But at least we know there was a common origin of life for both planets. And the third alternative is that there may be an independent origin of life on Mars, and that would tell us that first that you will have a different origin of life for both planets, which give rise to very different life forms, and that would tell us that in just one planetary system of the almost 4,000 and something that we do know that is six around the solar system, if in just one solar system you have two planets that with evidences of life, that would tell you that maybe life is a common phenomenon. And we haven't even yet, again, talk about the possibility to find life in this ice moon of Jupiter and Saturn, like Enceladus, Europa, etc. And if we find evidence of life again there, there will be a strong evidence that life is a common phenomenon in the universe. If you find at least just one single planetary system that you find, for example, life on Earth, on Mars, and maybe in Europa, and maybe Enceladus, or maybe in Titan. So there is an important lesson of how different or how similar is that Martian life could be, and what that could tell us about finding life elsewhere in the universe.
Right. In fact, if I'm not wrong, there was a lot amount of nitrate that was found in Atacama, which is as an evidence of dryness for a very long period, and so was discovered, if I'm not wrong again, on Mars as well. And nitrate is food for microbes. So does that give us a hope that there used to be life on Mars? Is that somewhere connected?
Not necessarily, because in the case of, you said nitrate can be used by life as a source of energy, that's correct. But in the places, in the way that nitrates form and remain in the Atacama, it is because it's so dry. And so that same dryness prevents an abundance of life. So in those same nitrate-rich areas, you don't find thousands and thousands of microorganisms. You find little amounts of microorganisms. So there is not a strong correlation between, as far as I have seen it, with my own eyes, whether nitrogen-rich areas has more or less life from than in others, because again, in the Atacama is so dry. I mean, the same mechanisms that allow you to have nitrates there in the first place are the same that prevent life from using it. And that makes sense also that could be the case. So in the case of Mars, again, the evolution of the planet itself was really different. So who knows what is the relation between this type of minerals and life there.
Right. So basically, it's a contradiction in itself. I mean, one place it lets microbes grow and thrive, and the other place it doesn't let abundance of life be there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you also look out for existence of life in the universe, like other than our solar system, other than our planetary system? Do you look for life another in this within
Yeah.
this universe?
Yeah, and that brings us to a very interesting question of how would you detect life as we don't know it? How
Yeah.
would you think of an instrument of the detecting what you don't even know what it's made of? And so,
Exactly.
up to date, my proposal, which is the only scientifically testable method to do that, is a way in order to see life as a very complex phenomenon. And so, life anywhere in the universe must necessarily be much complex than the environment that supports it. And so one way to assess complexity in an environment is to look into entropy. The entropy of life is much lower than the entropy of the abiotic environment. So if you could detect those differences of entropy, you could say, well, maybe I'm seeing something that is alive. I don't know what it's made of, but at least I can see an entropy difference that is so important that you could say, well, this could be a living thing without
Yeah.
even knowing what it's made of.
Right.
So we created a software that, based on fractal mathematics, is able to assess complexity as a way to assess entropy difference in order to tell whether you may be in front of a new living thing, for example, in an exoplanet in Proxima Centauri b, for example.
Hmm.
And that's up today is the only way to detect life. We don't know it, and it's my way to find life beyond the solar system, or what in the realm of the really unknown.
What got your interest in looking for life on other planets? How come you became so
Actually,
interested?
actually, that was a very common by my students of my courses, that at some point of the course I had, they always ask, well, that's we're looking for evidence of life as we know it. How we will look for life as we don't know it?
Don't know it. Exactly. That's a
and that
very
and that
challenging
and that
question.
yeah, and that question keep me, well, that's a very good question. How would you detect the undetectable? How would you build an instrument to detect what you don't even know what it's made of?
Yeah.
Because, for example, now we're sending all the instruments we are sending to Mars, they are all looking for things that we know. And so let's think we're talking about this in 20 more years, and we haven't found any evidence of life on Mars. We need to be very careful and say, well, we haven't found evidence of life as we know it.
We know
We
it.
have
Yeah.
found what we have been looking for, or we think we were looking for in the first place. That doesn't mean that we be a completely different type of life form that, for example, doesn't have DNA or doesn't have all the same proteins or whatever you want to think, or is not even made of carbon or something like that. So if you don't detect what you are looking for, it doesn't mean that it's something completely different. And maybe the planet is inhabited, but something so different that we may be in front of our own eyes and we don't even know it. And actually, that bring that same person to Earth, because on Earth we know that life originated in a period of evolution of the planet, which called the heavy light bombardment. It's the latest stage of the big, really big thing that impact Earth, the big meteorite, big comets, or big asteroids, etc. So, and at that time, we know that life may have originated more than once. And so you may have had a first origin of life, and then something really big asteroid completely annihilated everything, and then you may have a second origin of life, and maybe you have another asteroid completely annihilating everything, and so on. So that means that we are seeing around the development of the latest origin of life, and you may have had one previous one that is still lurking around, um, with a different structure, with different kind of molecules. Something that has another researcher has called the shadow biosphere, something that is still around, very small numbers, very different. We may have life, and we don't know it, even our own planet. And so people is looking for, well, how you would look for evidence of such shadow biosphere, and then giving us again the lesson on how we are looking for life as well. If we don't find life on Mars, you have to be careful. We are looking for what we know,
Right.
right?
Right. So basically, it can be any form. I mean, these people, if I can call them people or microbes, or I mean, they can be intelligent, they can be simply microbes doing their function of maintaining the climatic conditions, or they can look very different in forms, or they can be exactly like us. There's n number of possibilities basically that you are actually exploring without even knowing that what is there, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's very interesting. That is so. In that case, tell me one thing. I mean, two of the most influential men on Earth right now, I can say, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. If we don't even know, and we are not even sure, like you said, we can't be very confirmed about this fact whether it is habitable for human beings or not. And these two men are on their quest to colonize Mars.
Mhm.
How's that possible?
Yeah. First, I don't think that will be possible, because it is so expensive to
Yeah.
send anything there that it's very difficult to think that mass by itself will have the enough money to start with a colony on Mars as he's thinking of doing it. For example, the Perseverance rovers where NASA is going to be sent, it, only the rover itself, probably, I don't know the exact number, but probably cost billions of dollars. Just the little rover being sent, and you're telling me an individual with a company is saying sending the whole infrastructure for a city. It's very difficult to understand how it's going to be that. But even let's imagine that he's been able to do that. Actually, he's being, from my point of view, is being very brute on this, because we just talk about the problem of contaminating, how they will prevent all these people, contaminating a planet that we still don't know whether it has its own life forms yet. So, from a point of view, you can see this as a new form of colonialism, where you go and colonize some other place without minding of the consequences of another place. So that's what I like much better, the way that NASA, ESA is doing, being very careful step by step in order to have a proper path in order to solve this kind of question. For example, are we going to send so much contaminants that if you send a whole colony of humans, well, you have to say goodbye in order to say, well, we don't now we detect something, we have to be really careful whether we are detecting ourselves, for example,
Right.
right? So it's a very critical issue there on how companies are thinking about doing this without the proper science in the background saying, well, you have to be mindful of this, or this.
And even I to I mean take that thing forward. they would have to set up everything artificially, if I'm not wrong, in the sense that that planet, so far as whatever scientists have known about it, there's not been any human landing so far.
Mm,
And we are talking about a human colony over there. There'd be so
mm,
many things that you have to artificially set up. And if that happens, I don't know if that
mm,
happens or not. I mean, I think Mars would then become the first man-made living planet, if I may so
mm,
say so, because here on Earth we just happen to thrive, but there everything would be set up by human beings,
mm.
right?
Yeah.
But like you said, I think that would be very dangerous. And I'm speaking this in very layman terms. I mean, I'm getting
Mm,
into the basics that lesser gravity, very less water, really high UV radiations. Uh, even if you're able to afford the best of it, and even if you're able to create that, how are you going? I mean, how are you going to fix that?
mm.
Won't the consequences be very dangerous? What do you think about that?
Well, I think yes, as you do. I mean, it's so complex because you there, as you said, you have nothing to support human life. You have to bring everything with you. You have to create your own atmosphere in order to be able to breathe. You have to be able to create your own water. You have to create your own food. And so this is so complex. You have to create some kind of environment that not only protect you from UV radiation, but from every type of radiation we do have on Earth. Because on Earth we have our geomagnetic field created by this beautiful iron core that is rotating in the planet and created this geomagnetic field that protecting from a number of different really dangerous radiations that we don't have here. But on Mars we will have it. So how they are going to protect from that, and how are you going to be able to properly live on time, as you said, with a lesser gravity. So it's not as simple as like, okay, let's send this 100 people in there and everything will be wonderful after 5 years. It's not that simple. I mean, even the International Space Station that is so close to us, just 40 kilometers up, it has to be considered as an international accomplishment because again, it is so expensive to kind of initiative. And you're telling me you're sending you're sending a whole colony of things to another planet, considering that consider that only one third of what or if everything we have sent to Mars has been successful. Two-thirds either crashed, lost, or went somewhere else. So it's not an easy task. It's not something like, oh, I'm going to set a city in the Arctic. I can't believe you that you can set a city in the Arctic. But setting a city I mean, realistically, in another planet, on a harsh planet like Mars, is not. I don't think they sell it as it's being so straightforward. I don't think it's that straightforward.
How many years away are we even looking at it if this happens? I mean, are we talking about centuries? Are we talking about few years? Are we talking about next 100 years?
Well, every scientist that's trying to come up with a future of science, most of the time they go wrong. So I wouldn't even
Yeah,
venture. I
yeah.
can tell you that in the next decade we will be seeing astronauts for the first time on the Martian surface. That most likely will happen. But what happened after that? I mean, we're thinking now as people thought in the 1960s. After man arrived into the moon, there was huge plan of building moon cities and tourists going back and forth on something that was day-to-day basis go to the moon. That never happened. That never happened again because it was so expensive. Right after just a few missions, and they said, "Well, that's it. We're not going to spend this anymore because it fulfilled the end that they wanted to fulfill at that time, show your the technological superiority, and that's it. And so I think we're still in that stage before things happened. I said, well, we're thinking, well, let's have a city on Mars. Uh, let's go back into the past a little bit and just see what happened in the case of moons. I mean, in 1969, people really thought that by the end of the next decade, I mean, by the end of the 1970s, there will be regular traffic between moon and the moon and Earth, like going to another city, and that never happened,
Right,
right?
right. Okay. So, in the last, because I think we are almost towards the
Mm.
end of the conversation, I would really want you to tell our viewers that how exactly, because that process was very interesting when I read up about it. How exactly were you able to find the living beings, those microbes in that Martian-like, atmosphere in Atacama. Because what I read was that you were not expecting it that much, but it turned out to be an complete surprise.
Well, let me tell you about the most striking case. In 2003, NASA proposed a particular site in the Atacama to be the proper Mars analog model. And that came out because they tested the same, they did the same experiment that the Viking mission did on Mars in the 1970s, and but this time with soils of Atacama, and they found more or less the same results. So they said, well, this is a really like Mars-like environment.
Right.
And so, but I knew that the place they proposed to be, they also proposed that that place they reported in 2003 was the driest of the Atacama, and that's the driest on Earth. But I knew that was wrong because I was born and raised in the Atacama, and I knew that in those areas, heavy fogs were really common. So when I had the chance, I set a number of instruments in different areas of Atacama, and where I remember never seen fogs, never seen clouds, for example. And then I came up with the 4 places that were much drier than that place. And in the one, the driest, which is called Maria Elena, is a lady name of a nitrogen mining town that is nearby. I found it to be the driest. And there actually we found it to be so dry that we expected that we would not find anything in the soils. We thought, well, maybe this is the place that we think may be the dry limit for life on Earth, a place so dry that nothing was able to survive in it. And actually, I can show you pictures of the place that you will say, well, how anything would be possible, will be able to live here. But we dug 1 meter down into the soil, and we found a few microorganisms telling us that those life forms were able to survive even under those extreme dry conditions that were as dry as Mars. So we say, well, first maybe maybe there is not such dry limits for life on Earth, and second, we found that you find life on Earth at least in the driest of the places. So maybe dryness is not a particular limit in the case of Mars. Maybe Mars is not as dry as we think for life. So maybe we may find the evidence of life yet being conserved in those really dry areas, or maybe even you can find life still surviving in those really dry areas. And that came up all from what was known and my own knowledge on the Atacama, because I was again had the lack of being born and raised in that place, so I knew where to look for in the beginning.
What is that one insight that you got about human life when you saw microbes surviving and thriving in the most harshest conditions? What is that one insight about life that you were like that you had about human life?
That's correct. I mean, yeah, the way I see it in the camera is that every time I go, I find a surprise, or even an incredible surprise, telling me how life it has been able to adapt to the most amazing conditions and in the most amazing ways. So if that just happened in a very small area of the world, why that should not be the same case for my entire planet and also other planets, right? How intelligent life, so to speak, is able to adapt to the most amazing conditions in order to keep prospering. It's another way to say we need to take care of our environment, because yeah, and that may be my main and last lesson. You have to remind that we have only one evidence of life in the entire universe, is that our own planet. And what happens in the next 50 years, in 100 years, we don't have any evidence of life, not in the solar system, not in other planets, and we come up with a conclusion that maybe, actually, may be the case that our planet may be the only one, or maybe just a few other inhabited planets in our own galaxy. That would be a really important lesson to see, well, then, since we're so unique, let's protect what we have.
That's
Right?
beautiful thought. That's beautiful. But would you want to go to Mars?
No,
No.
I have been asked that a number of times. The answer is very simple. It's so dangerous. It's not
Yeah.
like traveling to the moon or the International Space Station. I mean, in the case of the International Space Station, there will be 2 accidents with the Challengers and the Columbia. So that we're talking about 2 missions of many that failed. But as I already told you, going to Mars is a completely different thing. I mean, again, only one third of everything that human have been sent. The Russians, the US, the space agency, the Japanese space agency, just one third of those missions have arrived on there. And then you arrive not into a tropical paradise, you arrive into a really harsh environment. So I would want to go to the ISS, yes. I would want to go to the moon, yes. Mars, no. It's just too dangerous.
I get it. Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Armando. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I really wish you all the best. And I really hope that you make some path-breaking discoveries, and all of the Mars mission actually accomplishes. And the way I want to see Mars story is that I really want to believe that billion of years ago there was actually an intelligent human form living there, but because of the explosion, whatever, we all wanted to move our headquarters to Earth and operate from here. So that's why we all are here. That's the kind of story that I would really want to believe in.
And
So
actually, let me tell you about an anecdote. These days, I have a house with 2 floors, and the second floor is my room, and my room is pointing now south. And when I turn off the light, I can see in the frame of my window, I can see the moon, Saturn, no, the moon, Jupiter, Saturn, and a little bit far Mars.
wow,
Just by being in my bed there.
wow,
And it's for me, it's amazing to say, well, those little dots of light are planets, and who knows whether maybe life on those planets, just by
exactly.
looking by the window of my room.
So true, so true. But it was amazing talking to you, Dr. Armando. I mean, because whatever I read up about it, it just built my curiosity so much, and I really wanted to ask you all those questions. And you were very patient to answer all my questions. So thank you so much, and I really hope that you also had a good time.
And thank you for your interest.
Thank you, thank you.